In May 2026, a ship left Lagos carrying 456,000 tons of gasoline, diesel, and jet fuel. Its destination was not Europe or America. Other ships from the same port were already heading to Ghana, to Senegal, to Cameroon, and to Angola. The fuel inside them was refined in Nigeria by a Nigerian company from Nigerian crude. If that sentence sounds unremarkable, you have not been paying attention to Africa. For 50 years, the story of African oil was the dumbest story in global economics. Nigeria pumped the crude, loaded it onto foreign tankers, and shipped the raw barrels abroad. Then it bought the same oil back as refined gasoline at a premium from refineries in Houston and Rotterdam. The continent sat on 12% of the oil on Earth and imported most of its fuel. Last year, that flipped. Nigerian fuel exports went from 46,000 barrels a day to 350,000, a sevenfold explosion in the space of 2 years. And that is just one ship, one port, one company. Something much bigger is happening across the whole continent, and almost nobody outside Africa has noticed, because the people who write the headlines are still telling the story of Africa from 20 years ago. In this video, I will show you what is actually happening on the ground, why the people who know Africa best are the ones suddenly paying attention, and why the next 10 years will not look like the last 50. I have spent over 20 years doing business across Africa. I have shipped through Lagos during port strikes, negotiated in Addis Ababa, watched factories rise in Morocco and Kenya. I am not guessing how this continent works. I deal with it every week, and what I am seeing now is something I have never seen before in all those years. The pieces are moving at the same time. That has never happened here. So if you want to understand what is coming before it is on the front pages, this channel exists exactly for that. The inside picture, not the view from London or New York. Start with the refinery, because it is the single biggest proof that the game changed. The Dangote petroleum refinery outside Lagos is the largest single-train refinery in the world. Single train means one integrated unit, bigger than anything Exxon or Shell ever built in one piece. 650,000 barrels of crude a day. To understand what that means for Nigeria, you need the history. For decades, the largest oil producer in Africa had to import nearly all its fuel. Its own 4 government refineries rotted at a fraction of capacity, while the country spent billions every year on imported gasoline, much of it subsidized, much of it smuggled back out across borders. It was an economy running a permanent leak. The Dangote refinery reached full capacity this year. The fuel imports of Nigeria collapsed below 130,000 barrels a day from over 500,000. The trade flipped. The country that was the poster child for the resource curse is now exporting fuel to its neighbors. And the man who built it, Aliko Dangote, started as a trader importing commodities. He is now building the same play in steel, in cement, and in fertilizer. When one African company can execute at global scale, the excuse that Africa cannot do manufacturing dies with it. But the refinery is only the loudest example. Look at Morocco, because what is happening there is quieter and arguably stranger. A country at the edge of Europe has quietly become the largest car exporter of Africa and the 4th biggest exporter of cars to Europe in the world, ahead of several European nations. Renault runs one of its largest global plants in Tangier. Stellantis is spending $1.4 billion to expand its Kenitra factory toward 500,000 vehicles a year. More than 270 parts suppliers have clustered around them. The industry target is 1 million cars a year, with a sales value around 20 billion. European car makers are shutting plants in Germany and France and opening them in North Africa for the same reason Japanese and Korean companies once moved production to China and Vietnam. Wages, yes, but also proximity, trade agreements, and a workforce that shows up. The cars you see on European roads are increasingly built by African hands, and almost no European consumer knows it. Then there is the East. Ethiopia, a country the West only remembers for famine and war, just posted the fastest growth rate on the continent, projected above 9% this year, driven by manufacturing, construction, and services. Rwanda, a country that experienced the worst genocide of the modern era 30 years ago, now hosts African headquarters and logistics hubs that would look at home in Singapore. Kenya, whose mobile money system processes more transactions per year than Western Union does globally, built that system a decade before Silicon Valley took digital wallets seriously. Ivory Coast has grown above 6% for most of a decade and processes more of its own cocoa every year, keeping more of the chocolate money at home instead of shipping beans to Switzerland. None of these are perfect stories. All of them are moving in the same direction at the same time, and that simultaneity is the thing I want you to sit with, because it is the tell. The green energy layer deserves its own paragraph, because it is the advantage nobody planned. More than 600 million people in Africa still live without reliable electricity. which sounds like a problem, and is also the single biggest opportunity on Earth. Building from scratch means skipping the technologies that rich countries are now stuck replacing. No legacy coal plants to unwind, no aging grids to defend, no utility companies fighting the future. Kenya already runs on roughly 90% renewable electricity, mostly geothermal and wind, a share green-rich Europe can only dream about. Morocco runs one of the largest solar complexes on the planet, visible from space, feeding power to Europe through undersea cables. A continent with 60% of the best solar resources on Earth and the lowest electrification rate is going to be built solar first, wind first, geothermal first, and the countries that industrialized on coal will be buying the energy transition hardware from the places that never had to unbuild anything. The latecomer advantage is real, and this time it belongs to Africa. The fintech layer is the proof that the pattern already ran once. While Western banks debated whether mobile money was legitimate, African users simply built an economy on it. The system that started as a way to send airtime between phones became the payment rail for savings, loans, insurance, and payroll, reaching people who had never held a bank account. Today, the continent leads the world in mobile money adoption by a margin that is not close, and the infrastructure built for low-value payments at massive scale is now the exact infrastructure global fintech wants for everything. African startups raised tens of billions across the last few years, and the exits are starting, where international finance buys the rails at valuations that would have been unthinkable for African assets a decade ago. When the financial plumbing of a continent gets repriced upward, everything connected to the plumbing gets repriced with it. The fuel tankers and the car carriers are the visible edge of that repricing. Now bring this down to your level, because macro stories only matter when they change decisions. If you run a business that sources anything from Asia, you have spent the last 3 years watching costs rise, tariffs land, and supply chains get political. Every serious procurement team on Earth is currently asking the same question: where next? The official answer everyone quotes is Vietnam, India, Mexico, but the flow of factories tells a second story. Chinese manufacturers themselves, the ones who took world production 20 years ago, are now building their own plants in Africa, not selling to Africa, building in Africa. Over 1,000 Chinese factories have gone into African industrial zones in the past several years, making everything from textiles to steel to electric motorcycles. The Chinese did not discover Africa by accident. They looked at the same numbers everyone else can see and then moved first. When the country that won the last manufacturing century starts moving its own factories to the next continent, that is not charity, that is a signal. And the numbers behind that signal are the ones nobody in the West has internalized yet. By 2050, 1 in 4 people alive on this planet will be African, not 1 in 4 poor people, 1 in 4 people, period. The median age on the continent right now is under 20. The median age in Europe is around 44 and climbing. Japan sits close to 50. The workforce in China is already shrinking. The working age population of Africa will nearly double by 2050 to over 1.5 billion people, and the continent will account for the overwhelming majority of all labor force growth on Earth for the rest of the century. Every consumer brand, every factory, every bank that plans to exist in 2040 is making plans around a market that most of them still describe as frontier. Adjusted for what money actually buys locally, the African economy is already larger than most Europeans guess, and consumer spending is projected towards $16 trillion by 2050 in the biggest estimates. The question is no longer whether Africa matters. The question is whether you notice before or after the price of noticing goes up. Let me put a face on that number, because percentages hide what a median age of 19 actually looks like on the street. It looks like Lagos at night, a city that adds people faster than any megacity on Earth. Its tech district on Victoria Island, lit up with startups paying global salaries. It looks like the engineering graduates coming out of universities in Nairobi and Accra and Cairo every year, in numbers that now rival Eastern Europe, working remotely for companies that have no idea where they are. It looks like the shopping malls in Kinshasa and Abidjan on a Saturday packed, because the average shopper there was born after the year 2000 and has never known a world without a phone. If your mental image of the average African is a farmer, you are picturing the parents of the actual median African, who is a city teenager with a data plan. Every market that got rich this century, China, India, Southeast Asia, got rich the same way, by turning a young workforce into a consumer class exactly when the rich world ran out of young workers. The script is old, the casting is new. Now the honest part, because this channel does not sell fairy tales. Africa is not one success story. It is 54 countries, and plenty of them are struggling badly. Currency crises have hammered Nigeria and Egypt. Debt restructuring has dragged through Zambia, Ghana, and Ethiopia. Coups have torn through the Sahel. Electricity remains the biggest bottleneck on the continent, and anyone who tells you infrastructure is solved has never run a generator through a Lagos week. There are real capital controls, real bureaucracy, and real political risk, and I have personally lost money to all three. The difference now is not the absence of problems, it is that the trajectory of the problems has changed. Growth rates are recovering while the debt crisis wave crests and passes. Regional trade is integrating under a continental free trade agreement covering 1.4 billion people, the largest such zone in the world by membership. And a young, urban generation is starting businesses at rates no previous African generation did, with smartphones in pockets and mobile money rails already built. The floor is rising. That is what big is being built on. So watch the doors the same way I do. Watch whether the Dangote model spreads to steel, to fertilizer, to petrochemicals, because it is already starting to. Watch whether Morocco hits its million-car target, because that number would put it in the same conversation as the auto industry of Thailand. Watch the Chinese factory count in African industrial zones, because when the source of the goods of the world decides the next source, they are voting with real money. And watch the payments, the part I see firsthand in my own business. 5 years ago, paying a Nigerian supplier meant cash routes and delays. Today the rails are digital, the mobile wallets settle in hours, and the suppliers asking to be paid in local currency are suddenly asking to be paid at all, because the orders are real. When the payment patterns change at the bottom, the macro picture at the top is already moving. Because in the end, the story of Africa has always been told by people who flew in, drove past, and flew out. The poverty snapshots were real, and the corruption stories are real, and the crises are real. But there is a second Africa that never made the news, the one that was quietly building while nobody was watching, and this decade it stopped being quiet. The fuel tankers leaving Lagos for West Africa, the car carriers leaving Tangier for Europe, the factories rising in Addis and Kigali and Nairobi, 1 in 4 human beings by 2050. The continent got rich once before on paper and watched the wealth sail away on ships. This time the ships are loading the other way, and the difference between those two stories is the biggest economic shift of your lifetime happening almost in silence. If you are already seeing it in your own industry, drop a comment below. I read every one. And if you want the inside view of what is really happening in Africa as it accelerates, subscribe. That is exactly what this channel is for. See you in the next video.